Well, anyway, it reminds us of what the president did say when he, during the inauguration of the cabinet, you remember what he said to them? He said, well, you are advisors, don't make me your advisors.
Yes.
But the way it is now looks like, well, the president is almost the one advising the advisors, because a whole lot of issues he talked on that particular day during his chat, security, power, unemployment, agriculture, and of course the possibility of us getting to meet together, or whether you want to call it a sovereign national conference, but without using that particular name. But again, looking at all of this, do you think we are likely to achieve what we are supposed to, knowing full well that already he's seen this as some of the challenges, what the people want now, that kind of external kind of dialogue now? He understands what the people are saying out of the chamber when they get to meet on a weekly basis. Are we likely to get a solution to all of this? Because these are huge issues when we talk about the national matters.
They are huge issues, and I would say, seriously speaking, the jury is still out. My feeling at the moment is that the general inclination is that with all of the best of intentions, our likelihoods at the moment, but not irredeemably so, are not very positive. What do I mean by that? Take a simple case. We've mentioned a number of them, security and everything. One of the first things you want to do when you want to achieve any great objective is to set out your clear targets. And even if you never achieve those targets, but to set out what you call a minimum standard of performance that you must strive at.
The president has clear targets. He's still running with the 7-point agenda.
Those are not targets. That's one problem. That was one of the problems the 7-point agenda had. I remember being on this channel and said those 7-point agendas were like something someone pulled out of a hat. Let me give you an example of a target. You're talking about education as a target. You say we need education for a 7-point agenda to be run. What does education translate to in meaning? Education is a vague term. It's a cliche. A cliche that says our educational system must improve. What does that mean? Improve to what capacity?
It's different from saying schooling and education.
And education.
Getting results.
Exactly. You need to be able to tell. Let me give you an example. You need to say, for example, our expectation is that in the next 15 years, Nigeria will produce 100,000 engineers. I'm just using that hypothetically. I have no idea what the figures are. But Nigeria will produce 100,000 engineers, and they must have capacities in this area and this area and this area, and must be able to compete on a world framework with this. I'll give you an example. When you're working on a vision, I said it earlier on in that program, there is something called the vision framework, which Jim Collins talks about in his book, Good to Great. There are certain things that make a vision. One of them is your core values, which we have never sorted out in Nigeria. That's a big problem we have. The second one is your core purpose, what you expect government is supposed to achieve for the people. The third one, which is very important, is what he calls the big, hairy, audacious goal. The one thing you want to achieve that takes a nation to a level that it ought to take to. And for that big, hairy, audacious goal to have meaning, you must have something he calls a vivid description. Let me give an example. Martin Luther King Jr., he said, I have a dream. Yes, but he didn't stop there. If he just said, I have a dream that one day black men will be okay, that's so vague. What does okay mean? $2,000,
so there were specifics.
He had to come to specifics. He said that one day, on the red hills of Georgia, the sons and daughters of slaves and of former slave owners will sit side by side at the table of brotherhood. You see, he was giving you specifics.
But the president talks about specifics too, in terms of agriculture.
What's going to happen?
He says the minister has got that. He is someone who he has so much belief in. Yes. And then some of the targets they have is about 3 million jobs with agriculture. And that for some reason we should stop, we should be self-sufficient in terms of perhaps rice production.
That's agriculture. Another specific, that by December 2012, Nigeria will be exporting cement, no longer, and exporting, or Nigeria would have stopped importing rice. Those kind of statements. Those are specifics.
Those are getting to be specific, and I think we need to have a lot more of that. The challenge is that there are not enough of them to make a whole picture. And I like that, the fact that he's getting that specific on that, although, again, I believe that whether the first thing you do is create a big idea you want to achieve. Talk about you have confidence in demand for agric, yes, fine. The question is, what are we going to do about it?
He says they need to stop all of this, just be a farmer, you get fertilizer here, and that's all there is to it. Banks have got to be able to, there has to be access to credit For instance, now if a farmer, you plant some crops that takes about 5 years, and you get a loan, banks come for you in 2 years, nobody will invest in agriculture, he says. So he says, listen, banks should be able to get that window, create that avenue, wherein a loan for 5 years, 10 years, to let that industry grow.
The second, which brings me to the second issue we have as a challenge in Nigeria. When you get with the specifics, then I've said it here before, we need to develop a concept of what I call rigor in any process. Right. You need to come up, someone's come up with the idea that banks would give, like I was talking to my wife this morning, and I said to her that one of the challenges is that there are certain things that government can do and certain things that government cannot do. And realizing the difference between the two is different. President Obama made an address about jobs in the US. And then the question about the address about jobs is, I said, there's a limit to how much government can create jobs. What government must do is to create an enabling environment. The enabling environment now leads to jobs, because a job that government creates ends up being a subsidized job that cannot be sustained in the long run, basically, which is one of the challenges I have with the labor unions many a times. But you see, the biggest challenge is, fine, you're setting even these targets. Even the process of setting the targets itself should be rigorous. We should have, if the minister is able to stand up with his onions, he should stand, that's why I talk about bringing advisors from outside the mold. He should stand in a place whereby you have somebody who would say to him, Honorable Minister, with all due respect, I don't think what you're saying makes sense. You know, the Japanese say that to make sense out of an idea, you need to ask 5 whys. If there's nothing circumstantial about the word 5. I think what they mean by that is that you need to keep on asking
questions
until you have no more depth.
Do we have men and women with such traits?
Oh, I think definitely. If there's one thing that you have about Nigeria, is that we do have such men. What has happened in our nation is that we have not honored. Is what you reward that you reinforce.
But again, aren't you a little bit worried that even the man or the woman who has that characteristics in asking questions, by the time he or she finally gets into that position, he stops asking.
Questions. So you keep on refreshing. The position is naturally a killing position. Let's be frank. The President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, you have good intentions. The position of being in leadership, especially of a nation, has a way of killing the person who comes into it in terms of your pressures are heavy.
In some, pardon me to butt it, in some climes, we've seen governments pay people just to think.
That's the idea.
We need such
that's
because when you talk about rigor, some in the academia here say that there's a dearth, and not at the risk of sounding derogatory or immodest, they say there's a dearth of critical thinkers. Yes. Of course, critical thinking also has to subject itself to rigor.
Yes.
Such that if you come up with a policy, you already anticipate a lot of responses from the people. Exactly. Such that when those responses come, you have answers for them, or hypothetical answers for them.
That's what we need to learn to do. It's one of the areas that a few weeks ago I took a training with an organization, one of the Nigerian guys, and we're talking about critical thinking. And the reality of it is that our general sociological process has not lent itself to that level of critical thinking. We have a system, for example, in our culture whereby when you get into an office, nobody's supposed to question you. When you have authority, you have the KBC mentality. The king is not asked any questions. And so it becomes a habit. And unfortunately, it's a self-defeating habit, because the people that ask you questions actually help you along the way.